Okay.
Good evening, everyone. We'll just get you all into the waiting room. If you'd like to chat amongst yourselves, you can, and at 28 minutes past, we'll mute you all. Good evening, everyone. We'll start at 28 minutes past by muting you all. So until then, if you want to say hello to people, you can.
Well, how interesting.
Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, David, on behalf of everyone.
Hi. I don't know if what success people have had with one of Thorne's hornet traps. So far, I managed to collect a European hornet and lots of wasps, but nothing else.
Hearing similar experience from other people's. I've had absolutely.
You won't be on camera?
I'm over in Kent, near Canterbury.
I went to school in Canterbury.
All right.
Yeah, bring it forward if you want. It makes no difference. Hey.
Well,
Mind you, I live in Lyme Regis now in Dorset.
he's a good speaker. You can
Yeah.
hear him.
Yeah.
So, it says this session is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube, but that don't mean nothing to me. See, they got me there. Ain't got you.
I wonder if we're going to get some sort of silver bullet for this evening.
Can you hear that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how to make it louder.
You control the volume at your end. We can hear you loud and clear.
Big microphone's on mute, isn't it?
No, he's not. You're not.
No.
Click on it.
It frightened me senseless when I saw a European hornet for the first time. And it was outside one of the hives. And I don't know whether that means that eats the bees, or is it just after the honey they got?
Okay. Jess.
Mute. The very first time when I was on to you, I was on with that and everything. That's why I got told off.
Jackie, Janet here. Yeah, European hornets do take bees. I've seen them actually taking them off my raspberries while they've been pollinating, which is really annoying.
Oh,
Well,
that's just
corrected.
not fair.
No, exactly. It's just not cricket.
Absolutely not. Okay, thank you for that.
I don't think they're as voracious as the Asian hornet, though, in terms of.
It's better.
I was down the side, now I'm not.
Well, getting in that is a damn sight easier than Lynn Ingram.
Yeah. Like,
Can you show me? It's starting in a few seconds.
207, 8, going up.
Yes, we had over 500 people on
Okay,
the
done it.
meeting yesterday, and over 800 people have watched it.
But what I haven't got is
Wow.
everyone down.
It shows you what concern there is for this, and quite rightly so.
Yes.
Last night he was talking, said he'd be talking for about 50 minutes. I think it ran over 55.
We'll start in a couple of minutes. It is like a bus keeps turning up and filling up the waiting room.
Better, isn't it?
Good evening.
Good evening. I'd say it's sunny where you are, but that's probably a very foolish question.
Yeah, I'm only around the corner in Epsom. Cheers. I'll mute.
Is it okay to say good evening, Diane Drinkwater?
It is, Colin. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much. I was just wondering whether I was actually connecting or not.
Yes, you're definitely loud and clear there. I'll be muting everyone very shortly, though, but it's lovely to see you. It's actually lovely to see so many names I know appear.
Good.
So thank you all very much for coming this evening. This is the second of our 2 special briefings for Asian Hornet Week this year. So I'm very pleased to again introduce Andrew Durham, a Cambridgeshire beekeeper who's talked to us before at 2 of our Asian Hornet conferences and who writes for the BBK News on the Asian Hornet situation in France. The briefing will take under an hour and will be followed by a Q&A session. If you want to type your questions into the chat function, you can, and we'll come to those at the end. So for the duration of the talk itself, if you could all mute yourselves, that would be lovely. We will mute you if you unmute. So, you know, there's 2 of us adminning, so we'll be quite quick at that. So thank you very much, and over to Andrew.
Okay, well, good evening, and let me just share my screen with you, just to make sure we've got the right one. So you should now be looking at a glorious picture of an Asian hornet. Yep, I think that's right. Yeah. Now, yesterday in part 1, we looked at the Asian hornet's life cycle and its interaction with the honeybee. So we now know the intensity of the hornet's attack builds up in relation to its seasonal cycle. We can see how that related to our bee's own cycle. And I covered the warning signs that indicate a surge in the hornet's nest. A surge year. Now in part 2 tonight, we home in on what the beekeeper can do to help their bees, but I do stress the importance of having that understanding that I talked about last night. If you missed it, please watch the recording, because just knowing what to do is not the same as understanding why you're doing it and knowing when you need to deploy additional resources to help your bees. Just once again, a reminder that images in this presentation are subject to copyright. Now, yesterday I mentioned a southern zone where nest densities are higher and a northern zone when they are lower. I was referring to the climatic zones known as the Maritime South and Maritime North. And of course, the Asian hornet arrived bang on that red dot down in the brown area. But of course, that was the situation where the Maritime South was in 1995. By 2016, it had moved up the country to encompass Brittany and part of Normandy, and it was spreading its way up the valley from Orléans up towards Paris. And it's just touching on the very far southwest of England and perhaps the Isle of Wight. This comes from the European Environment Agency. I also showed you a French computer model which gave the favourability for areas to the Asian hornet as of 2016. The modelling predicted that it would take until the end of the century for it to look like this. But with climate change accelerating, we really have no idea when that might actually happen. Now, this part of the briefing comes from a wide range of sources, from French departmental beekeeping associations. And here I need to make special mention of the Friends of the Bees of the Val d'Oise, the AAVO. which has gone much further than any other association to identify effective defences in their association apiaries, and who are now sharing the results of their findings with other associations across France. Of course, much of what they've determined simply echoes what other associations had already found out for themselves, but it's very commendable that they have set out to share their knowledge. One source of knowledge that experience has taught me is not reliable is the internet search engine, and in particular, beekeeper forums. The problem there is twofold. Firstly, on the internet, there is a huge legacy of outdated information, and I'll be pointing out a few examples of that later on tonight. Secondly, everybody seems to have a view on this or that defensive measure, and it is difficult to see whether that view is sometimes driven by other factors. A beekeeper may say with complete conviction that something is not effective without being aware that their expectation of it is perhaps ill-informed, or that they're not using it in the right way, or that they're not using enough of it, or at the wrong time, or they're not using it in the right combination with other measures. So I always look for an informed consensus, and I check that the information has not been superseded. The main French beekeeping union, UNAF, has published guidance to members and associations on how to deal with the Asian hornet. That is their most recent guide at the top of the screen, but actually a more useful document is at the bottom. It was published 12 years after the Asian hornet became installed and detailed the methods of the fight against the Asian hornet. You have two questions to ask there. Firstly, why did it take them 12 years to get that out? And why on earth make it a special issue that beekeepers had to buy? The SNA, which is the Bee Farmers Syndicate, issued guidance, and also the National Organization of Bee Health Groups has published a number of articles on apiary defences. The latest was in this August's edition. You will notice that two defence measures I'm going to be talking about tonight, the Moselier and the harp électrique, have been subject to scientific research and field trials. In this area of research, the Spanish are making their own contribution to the knowledge pool. Furthermore, one Spanish manufacturer of the harpa eléctrica, which the electric harp is called in Spain, devotes a whole section of their website to information on trapping and the use of their products. Now, I'm in regular contact with their CEO. They're carrying out their own field trials, coming up with new ideas all the time. More on that later. I'm mentioning this to you because I'm encouraging you to go and have a look for yourselves. So lots of information out there, and what you're getting is the benefit of that collective knowledge from our fellow beekeepers across the channel. Tonight, we are looking at defences against the hornet, and I'm going to go into detail in particular on 4 of the most important defences. Spring trapping in the vicinity of the apiary. And I'm going to be talking about defences in the apiary that include the muzzle, or la muselière, the electric harp trap, or la harpe électrique, and the hornet guard, or entrée anti-frelon. I wanted to investigate the practicalities of some of these devices in a Cambridgeshire apiary that can be damp even in summer and where the sun might not be shining for days at a time. I wanted to know how my bees would adapt to having a hornet muzzle in front. Well, if in doubt, try it out. So I brought them back with me, or built them to the French design and put them in my apiary. I will be clear when I'm talking from my own experience. You will see a little flag like this come up in the corner of the slide. Now, before we get into those, we're all beekeepers, so we know the importance of bee space. This is hornet space. If you want to keep the hornet in a trap or out of a hive, don't give it a gap of more than 5.5 millimeters. Buy a couple of 5.5 millimeter drills. You're going to need them to check hornet space. Now, control in the area around the apiary encompasses destruction of the hornet's main or secondary nest, but that should not be attempted by beekeepers. However, a primary nest can be destroyed by either slipping a big jar under it and cutting the pedicule at the top, or dealing with it using a foam wasp nest spray, but make sure you do it when the queen is home, or she will just build another. Unlike Vespa crabrow, Vespa velutina does not fly at night, so she's home by dark. If you decide to do this after dark, a little hint here is perhaps use a red LED rear light off your bicycle to see with, because she won't be able to see you and start flying around. Now, this applies to nid primaires that are in that 10 to 12 week period after the queen's emergence from hibernation. Once she has her workers with her, treat it as you would a secondary nest. What the beekeeper can and should do is spring trapping of foundress queens in the vicinity of the apiary. French beekeepers are all agreed that spring trapping reduces predation in the apiary, and Gilles Laniot, who is a former president of UNAF and an acknowledged expert on the hornet, maintains that it can reduce predation in the apiary by up to 80%. The logic is very simple. The foundress queens arrive in an area and make their first nests. That determines what happens for the rest of the year. If you can trap the queens that are within foraging range of the apiary during that limited period of first nest establishment, then you'll have largely knocked the problem on the head for the rest of the year, if you can trap them. Now, there is now an official protocol in France that has been nationally adopted from 2022, and this is based on that protocol. The Muséum National de l'Histoire Naturelle, whom you will recall is the French government's scientific advisor on the hornet, has been vehemently opposed to spring trapping of foundress queens right from the outset, but it has now had to concede to trapping in the vicinity of the apiary for a limited period of time. The illogical anomaly, of course, is that if spring trapping works in the vicinity of the apiary, why should it not work in the wider area? And as we saw last night in Morbihan in Brittany, the conclusion was that it does. Now, this is the town of Montenac in the Dordogne. It's another of our family destinations in France. The red and blue dots are indicating the hornet nests reported in 2009. The red dots were those destroyed, but the blue dots were discovered too late, and there lies the big problem. If you don't get all the nests, the hornet's formidable reproductive capacity soon makes up the numbers. I'll use Montenac and that nest report to go through the main points of the protocol. Our apiary for this exercise is the orange dot that I have placed on the image. First, we need to get a minimum of 2 traps out per apiary. During this limited period, the foundress queens are often to be found hawking in the apiary, and in addition to needing protein for their first set of brood, they need carbohydrate for themselves. So the protocol envisages trapping up to 1 kilometre from the apiary, because that is the distance that hornets are known to forage from their nest. But that is like saying that bees forage 3 miles from the hive. They may do that, but typically they forage much closer. So especially for the solitary queens, a hornet's typical foraging radius is nearer 600 meters, and that gives you a more realistic area to cover. Traps should be put near the site of any nid primaires or nests from the previous year. Hornets are just like wasps in that they like to return to old sites. How they know where the last year's lot were, I have absolutely no idea, but it seems to be a fact of life. Asian hornets like to be near water. So if you have a pond or river, put traps near that on the upwind side. Those are the light blue boxes that I'm putting on there now. Traps should be put no more than 350 meters apart around the apiary, and as hornets follow olfactory clues to find the apiary, your priority is trapping queens that are downwind of your apiary, because they will follow the scent of the apiary to find it. Now that you can see you have a pattern of traps around the apiary, remember to check them regularly to release any non-target species. Get the traps 1.5 meters off the ground, and most important, in the sun, so that the bait warms up in the spring weather and gives off its odor. That's especially important. Don't have too big a trap chamber, or the bait's aroma won't get out of the trap. Carbohydrate bait, because at this stage you want to catch the queen who needs carbohydrate food. We'll look at that more in the last part, controlling the apiary. Now, a last point to make here. I recall that our beekeeper in the Côte d'Or that I mentioned yesterday caught an average of 150 queens in his spring trapping in the apiary. First of all, to be effective, the trapping has to be in the area around the apiary, not just in the apiary. And second, a beekeeper in the Loire told me recently that he takes traps to his immediate neighbours and asks to put them on their property. He stopped counting at 250 this year, and the Loire is less infected. You do need to get the traps out into the countryside around the apiary. Let's look at the traps you should be using. Selective trapping is not just about the trap. There are other elements to this. Firstly, only trapping for a limited period removes from the equation a lot of native species that emerge later than Vespa velutina. The departments that do organised spring trapping only do it to the end of May, first week in June at the latest. You start when the temperature is consistently over freezing and rises during the day to over 12 degrees centigrade for about 4 days. That is when the French know that they have spotted and caught their first hornet queens. So that's your clue. Some use the appearance of Vespa crabro, the European hornet, as a clue that Vespa velutina queens will by then be confined in their nests, and the first Asian hornet workers are now looking after her. At that point, there is very little point in leaving traps out. You're just going to catch local species, and that's not the idea at all. Take away the drowning element, and the trap becomes much less attractive to flies, which in scientific tests comprised over 94% of the bycatch. Thirdly, you should provide 5.5mm escape slots for insects smaller than the Asian hornet to escape. And they do need to be slots, or the lepidopterans won't get out. This is where your drills come in, and a heated up drill is a good way of making the correct size hole. For a slot, you just join up 2 holes. Furthermore, the escape slots need to be positioned correctly, and this is where many, including the scientists doing trapping trials, got it wrong. The slots have to be at the top because insects go up. Between the trap outer and the inner funnel is ideal, but difficult to make. But slots in the inner funnel near the top, that works. Don't have the slots on the outside. As you can see on this trap, the hornet is attracted to those slots and doesn't go to the entrance funnel. I have seen this happen for myself. At the end of a 5-year study, this was the conclusion. Well-organized trapping of foundresses in the spring, careful observation of suitable locations for the establishment of primary nests considerably reduces subsequent observation of secondary nests. And that was confirmed by the Institute for the Study of Bees and Pollination in France that are leading the scientific effort, and the MNHN, which is the government's advisor. Now we look at control in the apiary. There is no single solution to the Asian hornet. Integrated control is a combination of actions and defenses employed at the correct time. Furthermore, some solutions work better in some situations than others. A strong colony will obviously fare better than a weak one, and there is no doubt that the hornet is very good at working out which is which. None of this is as simple as it sounds, and one size does not fit all, so you are going to have to be flexible. There are 5 quite distinct elements to integrated control in the apiary. The first concerns the apiary environment, making it work for the bee and not the hornet. You must act to reduce the stress on the bees because that is the hidden killer. Many hornets are returnees to the apiary, so we need to reduce the level of predation, and by doing so, we also serve to reduce stress. And although the Asian hornet's preferred method of predation is to hawk the bees, there does come a point when the hornets may mount a direct attack on the hive, so you need to know how to counter that. As beekeepers, we have to manage the situation if our bees are to survive. Remember, observe what is happening and respond accordingly. There are things we can do in the apiary to help our bees. Do not draw attention to the apiary by leaving hives open, leaving out frames, extracting honey nearby. You will attract the hornets. Remember, the hornets follow olfactory clues to find honeybee colonies, so we must keep the olfactory signature of the apiary as low as possible. You can spoil the hornets hawking in front of the hive and give the bees a better chance of making it back by growing the grass long in front of the hive. But it's not just about spoiling the hawking. The bees are very aware of what's happening, and so you're also giving those coming back somewhere to hide until the hornet has gone. If you are going to deploy the harp electrique, which we'll look at in a moment, then don't grow the grass right up to the hive. Let it grow to about 1 meter away and keep it short. We'll look at that in more detail when we look at the harp electrique. You might decide to screen off some of the hiding places that the hornet likes to use to ambush bees returning to the hive, especially under the landing board and stands. Use solid floors or put the insert board in on OMFs during periods of predation and close off any gap. You will reduce the olfactory signature of the hive, and you don't want hornets immediately under an OMF. It stresses the bees. Now, as an alternative to using closed floors, the Val de Wales Beekeeping Association suggests placing a super or brood box underneath the OMF with a mesh screen underneath it. But do not forget to seal off any gaps at the back of the OMF. It pays to group hives and spread the pressure of predation. A minimum grouping is considered to be 5 hives, and some recommend even 10. Don't overlook the obvious. If your bees are undergoing predation, can you move your bees? The hornets would have to find the apiary again. Now, this is one of the most important defenses against the hornet. La muselière, or the muzzle, is proven to reduce the stress on bees, and it helps to maintain foraging. But don't think of it as a blinker on a horse. It doesn't just push the problem from the hive entrance, it gives the guard bees a zone in which they can attack the hornet without being picked off by other waiting hornets. The bees realize this and adopt the area inside the muselière. The hornet also realizes the danger and usually stays out whilst there is a guard force present. Bees under hornet predation fly into the landing board flat out. They want to get to the safety of the guard bees as quickly as possible. So the original 6mm square mesh, first used by the muselière's inventor, beekeeper André Lavignon from the Pyrenees-Atlantiques, was good at keeping the hornet out, but it took the bees too long to get through the mesh, so they got picked off it. The mesh itself also restricted foraging. It is ironic that I saw advice to Belgian beekeepers to use 6mm square mesh. That is the outdated legacy problem that I talked about. The minimum mesh gauge is now considered to be 13 millimeters square, half-inch mesh. And that is the standard version sold by the big beekeeping suppliers. But there is evidence that some meshes, even up to 25 mil square, work well. It's much easier for the bees to get through and does not pose the same problem. But the larger the mesh, the greater the chance that more hornets will go through it. So there has to be a guard force present, and in the autumn, the colony may be clustered when the hornet is still predating. The beekeeper whose museliers you see here carries out spring trapping in the vicinity of his apiary. He does not always put the museliers on until he sees that predation warrants it. That's a good example of a beekeeper watching the situation and responding accordingly. I'm not going to cover netted enclosures, where you put the entire apiary into the equivalent of a fruit cage. If you want to go down that route and enclose your hives, then remember that the hornet will go through a mesh that is not close to the guard bees. So the mesh would have to be very fine mesh, and that brings its own problems. There's not much point in buying French museliers because they're not made for the national hives, but they are very easy to make. If you want plans, go online, search Frelon Asiatique muselier, select images, and you will find lots of plans. Just remember that our hives are 46 centimeters across, so that width needs to be 46 plus a little bit of tolerance. UNAF point out that you can just buy a roll of mesh from a builder's merchant and make something up yourself. So I did that the other day, just using a super as a template to get a rough shape and size. Don't forget to leave little lugs so that you can use them to connect the sides together. Finish off using a spare floor as a mold and then staple it to the hive. Don't ask for the design. I just did it in a spare hour and a half using some mesh that was handy, but you can get the idea. There are lots of variations on the muselier idea, such as this one called the Stop It Shield. I do like this design, I have to say. It is very difficult to track the movement of the bees inside due to the opaque plastic, which oddly enough wasn't part of the original design. Frederica tells me that she only does spring trapping and puts the Bouclier Stop It on her hives. She finds that's enough, and she's living in Agen, which is right where the hornet arrived first in France, so she's right in the thick of it. Now, I wondered how my bees would take to the Stop It. So as Frederica wanted to know how they worked on a national hive, she very generously sent me some to try out. I have found that whilst the bees fly out easily enough, when they come back, they seem confused about how to get back in and usually go under the Stop It, which is one reason that flap is there. If you put one on a national hive with a landing board, you will create a sharp angle. You can see it top right. That confuses the bees. Pin the bottom bar of a frame under the Stop It just before a hole so that the bees don't get stuck in that sharp angle, and then they easily climb up to the hive entrance. I can tell you it takes a few days, but they soon learn to come in the front. But it is because it takes a few days that the National Syndicate of Bee Farmers over in France tell you to get these on early, get the bees used to them. I talked about the Friends of the Bees of the Val d'Oise just above Paris. This is their favoured alternative to the mesh muselier. Now, by the time the hornet sees the bees emerging from the pipes angled up, they're going so fast the hornet can't catch them. And on return, the bees go flat out for that horizontal pipe coming in at high speed. The problem, as the Friends themselves identified, is that the beekeeper cannot see the landing board. And so they find they have to open these hives more often. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing to do. It is recommended that you paint the inside of the tubes matte black. And in fact, they have put a mesh at the bottom of those tubes to act as a bit of a sort of extra guard to stop any hornets that get in later in the season. Now, why some beekeepers complain that their muselier or stop it doesn't prevent the bees from being predated is beyond me, because the muselier does not, of course, stop the bees from being predated as they return to the hive, and does nothing to reduce the hornet numbers in the apiary. It's all about reducing the stress on the bees and encouraging them to keep foraging. But if you don't reduce predation, your bees are in trouble. Now, one way to do that is to trap the hornets in the apiary, but you have to consider how you do it and when. Although hives with museliers are observed to have less hornets in front of them compared to those that do not. So we're into trapping in the apiary, but remember, if you use bait traps, you may well attract hornets to the apiary that may not have found it otherwise. First, the simple bottle trap. The ones you see here will have had a tap trap fitted. There you go. Make sure your traps are big enough. The Vito Farmer trap is just too small for this game and needs emptying too often. I think it would be better used in spring trapping rather than main period predation trapping. GDSA 33's recommendation is to put at least 4 traps per hive, in front, on top, behind, and underneath. That may be too many for us in the early years, so you could try less and see how you get on. But the point here is this: if you put traps out in the apiary and they're not doing the job of reducing predation, then you're not putting out enough, or you need to move on to the next stage in apiary defense, which I'll be covering in a moment. Don't start summer trapping prematurely. You don't want bait that you use to attract the hornets until they have found the apiary. Remember from part 1 of the talk that predation starts in July and slowly builds, with that very rapid increase at the end of August and in September. Trapping can limit hornet nest size early on, and of course every hornet trapped is reducing hawking losses in the apiary. Now, what bait should you use? Well, if you have money to spend on custom baits like Vito Farmer's bait or Cetera, that's great. The classic French bait is dark beer, white wine, and dark fruit syrup. But the cost of it over here soon mounts up, and frankly, French fruit syrup just doesn't have an equal in this country. If I were tempted to pop over and buy some and bring it back, I don't think I'd be wasting it on hornets. Baiting traps with live hornets caught in a shrimp net is an National Institute of Agricultural Research recommendation. Nothing beats hornet pheromone as a lure, and I will be looking at a trap that will give you a ready supply of live hornets. Some pay a lot for commercial hornet baits. Many beekeepers just use pressed apple juice, but it must be pressed. Concentrate does not have the same aroma. The SNA, the National Syndicate of Beekeepers, that's the bee farmers in France, recommends carbohydrate bait in the spring and autumn, and perhaps swap to protein in the main predation period. But they do also say try different baits at different times, see which one is working best. Okay, now this is the national prize-winning selective trap invented by Denis Jaffre, a Brittany beekeeper. It has become the recommended selective trap funnel to use in the apiary in France. It is carefully sized to exclude insects such as Vespa crabrow and has escape slots in the funnel for smaller insects than Vespa velutina to escape. You buy the funnel in pairs, placed in traps opposite each other to get a good flow of air across the bait, which sits under an open mesh floor screen in a separate box below. They have sold tens of thousands of their funnels. Now they make the whole trap, but they come in at about €100. And I noticed, incidentally, an important little modification that they've added in, that extra screen at the very tip of the funnel. What bait to use with these traps? Wax cappings and fermented honey placed under the open mesh floor of the trap works really well, but make sure that the honey has fermented by putting it in a warm place before you put it out so you don't attract the bees. Denis' recommendation is to use at least 2 of his traps in the apiary and place them with the prevailing wind in mind, so the hornet, following olfactory clues, finds them first. Now you can make your own version of Denis' trap using a national brood box, some OMF flooring and a plastic queen excluder. All of those come from E.H. Thorne, and you'll need a couple of 5-inch diameter stainless steel catering funnels with the end chopped off to form a slot. Be careful, it will be razor sharp. Trim the panels and fit to the front and back panels as shown to form a slot that the excluder can slide down into. Modify a couple of catering funnels, slot it all together. Perspex lid, place the trap over a super or eek with a tray of cappings and fermented honey under the OMF. And if you make sure the funnel is restricted to 7 millimeters, it does keep out local Vespa crabro. Wasps go in, but of course they just come out. So it's doing exactly what it is supposed to do. Now let's look at what is fast proving to be a very effective and selective method of reducing predation in the apiary. This is the harp electrique, or ARPA electrica as it's called in Spain. This can negate the need to do any wet bait trapping in the apiary. The harp, or ARPA, is a grid of stainless steel wires invisible to the hornet's vision. It flies into them, gets an electric shock that temporarily paralyzes the flight muscles, causing it to fall into either a water bath with a wetting agent where it drowns, or into a trapping chamber, the dry harper as it's called. Obviously, you cannot use these where other people are likely to come into contact with them. They're like an electric livestock fence in that respect. Early versions were usually homemade, like the one you see here, which I made. Like other early versions, there were often problems with electrical reliability caused by poor connections. And in fact, this one had to be modified to solve that problem. That problem, and the fact that they have to be positioned correctly, caused UNAF, the Beekeepers Union, to only give a very cautious approval to them. The power units were very expensive, and I found them to be far too powerful, leaking current through the cables or even shorting out on the grid, causing arcing. A lot of lessons have now been learned. This endorsement appeared in an article on the harp electrique in the National Association of Bee Health Groups magazine, where the harp was thoroughly recommended. And they quoted a beekeeper in the Ile-de-France as saying that it proved to be an undeniable asset. So we'll look slightly closer at them. The Spanish picked up on the harp electrique and improved it. They're much cheaper and more reliable than the old French versions. Wet harpers, on the left, had the problem of attracting bees that thought the bath was a water source. That problem has been solved by a GDSA beekeeper using lemon-scented washing up liquid boosted by Jif Lemon as required. The dry ARPA collects the live hornets in a trapping chamber. This trap will come into its own when somebody comes up with an authorized Trojan bait, but that's some way off. Prices there are quoted without Spanish sales tax or shipping, and don't overlook that you may have to pay import duty and VAT at this end, but it's still good value. It's actually, I reckon, probably more cost effective and certainly in time more effective to buy them in if you can get them in from Spain rather than sitting there constructing them from scratch. There is a version of the ARPA which is actually a baited trap. You would use these for spring or autumn trapping rather than using them to try and reduce predation during the predation period. Incidentally, autumn trapping is the form of trapping suggested by the scientists and entomologists because there is a much lower risk of collateral damage to other insects. But I have to point out that as the workers and male sexuals die over winter, and if only 5 to 10% of queens survive hibernation, then 97% of what you're going to catch in the autumn was going to die over winter anyway. So you have to ask if this is a good return for your effort. This was the conclusion of a field study carried out jointly by 2 universities in Spain on the effectiveness of the ARPA. So electric harps contribute significantly to mitigate the impact of this invasive species on apiaries, deployed in tandem with additional measures such as access to food sources during periods of highest predation. Now, Sandvey are in the forefront of ARPA design, and their associated systems, such as the new ARPA's SIBO, which incorporates these precisely sized balls that actually prompt Vespa velutina to attack them, mistaking them for bees. This almost doubles the already impressive catch of the ARPAs. Now, I must say now, and I forgot to put this in my notes, I have no financial connection with Sandvey at all. So I am not selling you a sales line here. If you order one, it will come like this. Very easy to assemble, a snap together frame. And as long as you follow their YouTube video on how to do the wiring, that's straightforward too. You just copy what they're doing. It doesn't have a sound thing with it. We are not in the EU anymore. So what happens is this. You pay the supplier for the goods and carriage. It will get shipped over with an export form that the carrier sends to HMRC. If it's over the limit, the carrier will ask you to go online and pay them the import duty and VAT, then they deliver it. Now, Sandvey have not yet been exporting to this country. So I've played a bit of a dirty one on Eugenio Pichel, who's the CEO over there, because I've placed an order with him for about 160 quid just to force him to actually go through the customs process and get one of these, get a couple of these shipped to me to add to the one I've already got. Placement is very important. The principle is really simple and exploits the fact that hornets hawking the hive are flying around it, waiting to catch the bees, because the bees fly out and up, but the hornets tend to fly around the hive. So you place the harp out of the bee's flight path, but in the flight path of the hornets. The choice of placement is between Spanish style. Placed in front of the hives, it's more effective, but with an increased risk of trapping bees, so you don't have them out during the swarming season. Put them about 30 to 40 centimeters away from the sides of the hive and slightly back. A harp for every 4 to 5 hives and always one at the end, each end. Now, long grass or a barrier in front of the hives pushes the hornet's flight path closer to the ARPA. And think about closing up the gap between the hives to less than you would normally leave. If you do this, you really must adopt the continental practice of using colours and symbols to differentiate hives. It really does reduce drifting and is much better from a hygiene point of view. Remember, no red colours and simple symbols are best. Squares, crosses, circles, etc. So this is Spanish style. Notice the long grass creates a zone into which the hornets are channeled towards the harp or ARPA. French style is the alternative. It puts the harp at the sides or behind the hives, less efficient, but safer for the bees. It can be better to use the French style early in the season if you're not sure the risk of swarming has passed. And a tip from the Spanish, move the harps around, the hornets learn to avoid them. And a tip from me, from my trials in the it hasn't got the flag up here, but a tip from me from my trials in the Cambridgeshire apiary, keep the HV power unit away from the hive, not the harp itself, but the power source. The bees don't like the electrical noise of the circuitry. So this is French style with the harps behind and between. Looking at it from the back, notice how the power unit on that far green harp has been positioned away. The power unit for the middle harp is actually in a metal box under an empty hive. And the hive just beyond the white harp is an empty spare hive, or I would never position the white harp's power unit so close. Don't put them on or near the hive. It can provoke an absconsion. So these are Samvé ARPAs placed French style, and note the Spanish style or Spanish version of Bezeliers on the front of the hive and the bottle traps. More ARPAs, but this time configured Spanish style. You'll notice that some do not have any capture tray underneath. In fact, somebody there is using a metal sheet to cook the hornets when it falls on it. Novel idea. I've no idea how well that works, but I don't think it would in this country. But top marks to that beekeeper for thinking laterally. There is a school of thought that you only need to scare the hornets off. I have to say that with most harps, the hornets are just stunned. So all that does is defer the problem to another time or pass it off to another beekeeper. Furthermore, it will do nothing to hold back the development of the nest. So I'm going to suggest to you that the beekeeper is not there to be nice to the hornet. So make sure you kill it. Samvé disagrees with placing any attractant traps in the apiary at all during the predation window, arguing it's counterproductive. I think they have a very good point. And of course, baited traps do need time and effort to maintain them properly. Whatever you decide to do, bait trapping or electric harp or both, it is important to catch those early workers and slow the development of the hornet's nest. Push the period of maximum predation as late as you can. Now, this is one of 3 harps that I've constructed to French designs, and the details are in a PDF that I'm going to give you a link to. That inset photograph is from a Spanish apiary, just to ram home the point that these harps or ARPAs catch an awful lot of hornets. Typical ARPA in a predation area in the southern zone would be catching over 1,000 hornets a week. You may notice in the PDF that I sometimes say I would now leave a bigger loop, or I would now choose a slightly thinner wire. That comes out of my experience of putting them together in the apiary for extended time trials. Nothing wrong with them as built, but I think it can be done better. So I'm giving you the benefit of that experience. The power unit for the harp can be a pricey item. If you want to economize, and if you have the necessary electrical skills, you can save money by buying an insect zapper bat from Amazon for less than 20 quid. In fact, I see there's an offer on at the moment, $18.99 for 2. Strip off the paddle and make your own HV unit. Now, when I did this for my first set of tests, which was now 3-4 years ago, I put them in fancy weatherproof containers as shown left. But then I thought, well, why not save time and effort and cost and just mount it in a spaghetti storage container? And it works beautifully. For safety, cut the wires to the internal battery. And in any case, the unit needs to be one that can be recharged from a 5-volt USB supply that in turn is connected to a 12-volt battery via a voltage converter. Now, as I've just said, I have 3 of these units. They are powerful, and I have to say, electrically remarkably robust. Always use a timer. It saves battery power, and it protects bats that may be flying at night. So to power these harps, you will need a 12-volt car battery and charge it overnight, or swap a second battery in when you do an inspection. And that is the most cost-effective solution for most hobby beekeepers. But for those who have a larger apiary and would put out several harps, or just don't want to load batteries about, you can use solar PV panels and recharge the 12-volt battery to run several harps. You cannot just use solar panels. It doesn't work with the UK weather. Notice in the photograph the white 12-volt timer unit from Amazon. The 2 units on the left with silver labels are 12-volt to 5-volt converters, again from Amazon, from which 4 harps are being powered off that one. You can see them plugged in on the far right. The central unit is a solar panel control unit. Now, although you can power multiple harps off one power unit, I don't think it's a particularly good idea, because you can get power losses on long cable runs. And if a harp gets shorted out, the others in that system are useless. I have put a 12-page technical paper on this subject onto the BBKA website. So we'll have a link to that in a moment. Okay, highlighted here in red is the Department of the Ure. Again, it's about the same size as Devon. We're out of the southern maritime zone now and just into the northern maritime zone. Now, in 2016, This department reported a few hundred nests. But the hornet was establishing itself and the climate was changing. Just 4 years later, in 2020, the department's Loot Collective destroyed over 1,000 main nests and 600 nid primaires. In the surge year of 2018, that went up to over 3,000 nests. Now, Maxine Leclerc, yes, I have changed her name. Pictured here is an agricultural health technician who got together enough money to invest in beekeeping for extra income. Let's pick up her story, but remember what I said about the need for beekeepers to know the Asian hornet's life cycle and what happens if there's a warm autumn. 3/4 of her hives are lost. At the beginning of November, in the space of just 2 weeks, an attack by Asian hornets decimated the bee colonies installed by Maxine Leclerc in her village in the Eure. Still shocked by her loss, Maxine had never experienced such a situation at this time of year, but autumn broke all heat records. She had removed her traps and brambles that she normally puts around the hive entrances. Now, I don't think her traps would have changed the outcome because we're talking of direct attacks now, not hawking. And her makeshift bramble museliers, and hey, if it works, great, wouldn't have stopped the hornets because the bees were clustered and there would have been no guard force to deter them. She is by no means the first to get caught out. These late attacks happen all the time and beekeepers get caught out all the time. A late direct attack is foiled by restricting the entrance to the hive to 5.5 millimeters, and you need it even if you're using the muselier for the reason I've just said. A mouse guard or a white Nico entrance guard is sized at 8.5 millimeters, and it may be helpful early on in the predation period because it doesn't impede the bees as much. But it will not do the same job in keeping out hornets, especially if the colony is clustered. Now, be careful because the green Nico restrictor will also stop drones. So you shouldn't have these on too early, nor should you put them on necessarily because they do hinder the workers. Make sure they are pinned in place and are fully down. 0.5 millimeter is critical here. Now, this is very important, especially on a national hive with a landing board that may be slightly lower than the OMF floor entrance. Make sure you check the gap. It must be 5.5 millimeters to keep the hornet out. 6 millimeters won't do it. And double check the gap with a drill, or you can trap the bees in the hive. I have done that, and it wasn't until I next visited the hive that I noticed the error. And remember that most losses are caused by hawking and the hidden effects of stress on the bees. So you cannot just rely on an entrance restrictor alone, which some beekeepers still try to do. If you cannot get a bulk order in for Nico hornet guards, then use some plastic insert board and set the gap using 2 drills, which is why I said buy 2. Now, beekeepers asked me about the Veto Europe Apishield. These were tested by INRO when they first came out, who found them useful in the late season when the hornets were trying to enter the hive. I have these, and after 5 years of use in this country, I can certainly vouch for the Apishield's effectiveness against wasps. But from personal experience, I found there are some problems associated with it. I had to reinforce mine. The sides started to curve out and I feared they might collapse under the weight. I do not use it directly under the hive. I think it has too many hiding places for wax moth. And if you pull out the top mesh tray with a hive on top, you will never get it back in. I don't think enough ventilation gets into the hive. Do not leave them on over winter. Lastly, the Canadian comb escapes work, but quickly get clogged up with spiders' webs and need weekly cleaning out. And I have to remind you that French beekeepers are concerned about the stress caused by keeping hornets trapped so close under the bees, hence the GDSA recommendation to use solid floors. Now, that's my personal experience and opinion. We now come to the last element of defense against the hornet, one that's very important indeed, the beekeeper. Remember INRA's caution in part 1, it's a multifactorial situation and the various factors are cumulative. Colonies that are sick or carrying high varroa loads are not fit to fight the Asian hornet. But think very carefully what varroa treatment to use during the predation period, because some of them, especially vapor formic acid treatments, are very stressful for the bees. Weak colonies are very vulnerable, so INRA suggests uniting weak colonies before predation starts. The predation period is not a good time to have a colony decide to supersede, requeen early. If the beekeeper has taken off the honey and left them short of stores, then foraging paralysis is going to hit them even harder. Worse still, if there is no nectar flow, they're going to starve regardless of anything the hornet does. Remember the GDSA advice to feed your bees at dusk, and don't overlook the fact that worker hornets like syrup too, so don't spill any. If predation becomes excessive and you have the option, consider moving your bees. And remember the one word every French beekeeper uses to describe the bees predated by the Asian hornet: stressed. Now, I suggest that now is a good time to download and spend an hour reading these PDFs that are lodged with the BBKA. The hornet and the honeybee tells you all about the hornet's life cycle, so you know when things are going to happen and you understand exactly what is happening with the bees. Integrated control in the area around the apiary explains the benefit of spring trapping, which can significantly reduce the number of hornets in the apiary. Integrated defense in the apiary explains exactly what you can do in the apiary to help your bees. Lastly, there is that 12-page paper that gives you all the technical detail about the harp electrique, how to build it, even down to what gauge of wire to order off Amazon. These papers are sitting there waiting for you. Your association should have them on their website. Okay, I'm now going to summarize. So we're down to the last couple of slides. I'm going to pull in what I covered in part 1. I'm using traffic light colors. Red is bad, green is good. Amber can go either way depending on circumstances. I've underlined the really important measures. First, let's recognize that apathy and ignorance on the part of some beekeepers are two of the Asian hornet's greatest allies. Certain factors are going to determine the scale of the problem you face, so you need to do a bit of a risk assessment. What precise climatic zone you live in will determine the degree of infestation you are likely to get. If you are down south, you are going to get more than if you live in the Midlands or up north. By a river, more than in a wood. If you're an urban or suburban beekeeper, you are likely to get more hornets than if you are in a rural area because there's less other prey available. By far, the biggest factor affecting nest numbers each year is the weather. Remember, if it's a good year for your bees, it will be a good year for the hornet. So you will need to be extra vigilant in the hornet surge years, especially if there is a warm autumn. All these factors are now cumulative, so we have to look at this holistically. Sick bees are in no shape to fight off the hornet, so there is an additional need for good apiary hygiene. Bees with high varroa loads are compromised, but during predation, avoid fast vapor treatments. Make sure that your beekeeping practices are not making matters worse, and above all, avoid stressing the bees. Get the colonies settled before predation picks up, and then it's minimum manipulation, timed just after dawn or before dusk. One size does not fit all. It's important that the beekeeper monitors what is going on and adapts what they're doing to best support their bees. Integrated defense is all about putting the right measures in place at the right time. So emergence of the foundress queens should prompt the start of selective trapping in and around the apiary, but only until the end of May. Make sure that your apiary environment is in favor of the bee and not the hornet. Pay particular attention to keeping a low profile, a factory profile in the apiary. Avoid single hives. Consider uniting weak colonies. Before predation starts, get the large mesh museliers or basic stoppets on the hive so they get used to it. Be cautious about small mesh museliers too early in case you interfere with swarming and drones. The same applies to putting on hornet guards too early, which is why you need to know the hornet's life cycle. The start of predation in the apiary should see the commencement of apiary trapping and or the deployment of the harp electrique. Your bees should never be short of food, so leave them with plenty of reserves. Don't overlook the danger from direct attack. Get an entrance restrictor on the hive before you get into September. Lastly, if it's an option, move the bees. Above all, understand and manage the situation. Now, of course, that was a slide that assumed you don't have the harp electrique and will only consider it as a last resort, but I do have them, and so my priorities would be different. My harps would have to go into operation early on because they won't attract the hornets and they will kill off more of those early workers. I think I would use French style initially if there is any danger of swarming or supersedure, and then transfer to Spanish style later on. Like the beekeeper in the Loire, I'll consider putting on the museliers if I see the bees bearding. And only as a last resort would I bring out the Jabber Pro traps because of the risk of attracting even more hornets. One size does not fit all. Understand and manage the situation. Okay, it just remains me to acknowledge the enormous contribution I've had to these talks from the French institutes and associations that made the information in these briefings available. I'm particularly grateful not only to the beekeepers named here, but also to those other beekeepers who gave their time to talk at markets and whose apiaries I called in on. Whatever you do, as I said yesterday, don't start reinventing the wheel. The French beekeepers have done that for you. Thank you for your attention. Diane, I'll stop sharing my screen if I can find out how to do that. Here we go. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. That was absolutely excellent. We have quite a few questions. The first one is, how do Asian beekeepers deal with the Asian hornet? Is there some lessons there for us?
I'm sorry, but I would have to say I really don't know. My research didn't extend outside of France. The nearest I ever got to having any sort of answer for that was from Heather Matilla when she gave a presentation to us on the Cambridge beekeepers. And I'm not sure that they were doing very much looking at the state of the hives that she was showing in her presentation. In any event, most of the hives she was looking at were Apis cerana, and that's a totally different bee.
Thank you. There's a question about what is being done to share information and involvement with other organisations. And I'll answer that one quite quickly. The non-native species unit deal with that, as do NBU, and BBKA also do that. We've emailed people, we've emailed large organisations, but it's something local associations can also be doing. If you know particularly close to you, there's garden centres or horticultural companies, you could contact them. There are a couple that people will find answered in yesterday's talk, which is available on YouTube, so we won't do those. But why is there opposition to spring trapping? Is it just the cost?
No, in fact, it had nothing to do with the cost. Right from the outset in France, there was such a panic by the local population when the Asian hornet started appearing in the villages and in the towns, that they went a bit mad, and everybody was putting out lots and lots of traps. Even the town hall was handing them out. The scientists at the Muséum National de la Histoire Naturelle got very alarmed by this, and were coming out very, very strongly objecting to spring trapping because of the bycatch. Most of the traps that were being used, the vast majority, were killing traps. They were drowning everything that went in. And what the scientists were really concerned about was that there was going to be a dreadful effect on biodiversity, and they would lose even more insects. And they didn't think that spring trapping was particularly effective because there was a very high bycatch. And as I said in the presentation, 94% of that bycatch actually turned out to be flies. Well, two departments thinking about it did spring trapping trials for 5 years with massive wide area program of spring trapping, and they proved that spring trapping makes a notable difference to the number of secondary nests. Beekeepers have always vehemently argued that spring trapping reduces predation in the apiary. And then there was that paper that came out that I mentioned, where it was disclosed by the MNHN that an average Asian hornet nest was consuming 11 kilograms of insects. When that was compared to the results of these trapping campaigns, it was realized that actually trapping was the lesser of two evils. So now we have the protocol for spring trapping. That's where the objection came from. And it's been a hard-fought battle, but that dispensation only applies for selective trapping in the vicinity of the apiary and for a limited period.
Thank you. Some French beekeepers think selective traps should be used all year round to reduce worker numbers and catch new queens in the autumn. What do you think?
I don't think it really matters what I think. I think the fact is the official line in France is very much against that sort of trapping. So we will have to come up with our own decision. I'm not actually sure that trapping outside of the, in fact, I should just qualify that. There has never been an objection, even from the French MNHN, to trapping in the apiary during the predation window. But I think everybody has agreed that widespread trapping out in the countryside, away from the apiaries, is just too damaging on the biodiversity.
Thank you. How do bees under siege by Asian hornet perform orienteering flights?
I have absolutely no idea.
There are a couple of questions that I'm going to combine about wasp prevention entrances, the underfloor one and the upstairs downstairs one. Will these work against hornets too?
Which I'm not sure I know which wasp traps you're talking about.
The underfloor entrance where the bees come in and go up.
Oh,
So
I see.
A different floor.
Okay. The well, that in fact is the principle behind the Vito Pharma Apishield, is that although the entrance is at the front, it's actually coming up through a sort of tunnel into the brood box. It's actually that's the wretched problem with wax moth, because it hasn't been built well enough to seal off all the holes. It works against wasps. The hornets are not trying to get into the hive at that stage, but later on, especially if the colony is clustered, the hornets will go in there. So I'm not sure that that works particularly well against hornets.
Okay. Is the harp suitable for small spaces, such as perhaps small gardens or balconies?
Well, if you can get a hive in a garden and get a harp either side about 40 centimeters away from it, then it's obviously going to work, isn't it? Because the hornet's going to be flying around under the hive anyway. So I don't see a problem there.
Yeah. Who deals with the nests in France?
Well, that's a very good question. Where you have a loot collective, which is the collective struggle, as it translates to, that is run by under the auspices of the department's control program. And usually they get somebody like the FDG-DON, which is a pest and disease control organisation that's nationally certified to come and run the scheme for them. So you have kind of several elements to nest destruction. We have the Loot Collective with their network of referents who are often beekeepers who go out and confirm the nests. Then we have the coordinators who are the FDG-DON, and then we have pest controllers who sign up to all the protocols, and they go out and actually destroy the nests. And pretty much all of them now in those areas have got the special bee suits and everything else that they are allowed to that they need to wear, and they are allowed to use certain chemicals. Permethrin, I think, is no, I don't know it is permethrin anymore. I'll go back on that one. I can't remember the name of it. But that's done under the Loot Collective. There are still beekeepers who go out there and will tackle nests in their area using poisons that are often unauthorized, and often they don't have the certification to use it. That, I have to say, is not a very good idea. The fire brigades will occasionally go and destroy a nest. That initially the fire brigades did almost all the nest destruction, but that became too onerous on them. So if there is a nest in an area which is affecting public safety or an immediate threat, then the fire brigade will go and destroy it. They do it extremely efficiently, and in fact are really quite admirable for their efforts. But those are the main people doing nest destruction over in France.
Thank you. And the second half of that is, who will do it here?
Well, that's a good question. I can tell you who I think shouldn't do it. That is, I don't think beekeepers should go and do it, because it's quite a dangerous procedure. And if it's not carried out carefully, it can actually cause more damage than good by dispersing the hornets all over the place. But of course, they've done it very successfully in Jersey, so we should acknowledge the tremendous efforts they've made over there. And they've clearly now got quite a lot of experience. But over in France, generally speaking, and it's a bit of a generalization, the Loot Collectives have got very efficient. It just doesn't seem to work as well when the coordination effort is done by bee health groups or beekeeping associations. It is a mammoth job if you're talking about thousands of nests. I really think it's something that needs to be done in this country, and the sequence of events should be that the government should basically pass a law that says an Asian hornet nest must be destroyed, but that will have to have attached to it some sort of funding, probably at county level, and then get parishes to contribute their share and get the individual to contribute their share. So you effectively insure yourselves by splitting the cost of this over the county and the local council and your parish council. That's the only real effective way to do it. I have read Hampshire's proposals, and I think it's very admirable that they are agitating and trying to get people moving, because there does seem to be a bit of a vacuum as to what happens when the MBU withdraws. But as it is predominantly unfunded, I can't see how it will work, because every Asian hornet nest destroyed on the continent costs roughly €100. So there's quite a bill attached to this, and that doesn't include the cost of running the scheme.
Thank you. What temperature do Asian hornets stop flying at?
I don't know. They stop flying at dusk. But if you think that the Asian hornet comes out when the temperature is, or the queens emerge when the temperature is only 12 degrees, and they continue flying until November, and it often can be seen flying in December as you get them dying out, I think they're an extremely hardy little insect, and I wouldn't waste my time thinking too much about temperature.
Thank you. Have you come across the guard apis hornet trap, and how effective is it?
No, I haven't. I don't know about it.
Right, okay. I've had to scroll down through again many messages saying thank you, Andrew, for a very informative talk. I think everyone here tonight's found it really interesting and useful. So thank you very much from everyone here. I will pass on some of the messages to separately. But thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for coming this evening.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.